For decades, the Middle East has seen an application of overwhelming military force and carefully negotiated treaties, yet the violence always returns. We call the traditional operating system behind these efforts victory logic. This approach treats security as a zero-sum contest. It prioritizes narrative closure and threat elimination, attempting to maximize one group's strategic control over a defined territory. The left column of this table outlines the specific methods victory logic relies on: deterrence escalation, external strategic control, and force-backed order. Applying this logic to a geographically contiguous region generates instability. Absolute security for one population, achieved by suppressing another, creates pressure within the system until it physically breaks. Treating a living region like a mechanical chessboard actively manufactures the conditions for the next war. Dr. Bichara Sahely proposes an alternative. He argues that policy must shift away from managing political boundaries and move toward protecting biological and civil continuity. The right column of the chart defines viability logic. This approach identifies success as the preservation of shared life capacity and legitimate coexistence. To build this model, Dr. Sahely pulls from three distinct academic disciplines. The framework synthesizes John McMurtry's life-value ontoaxiology, Johan Galtung's structural violence theory, and Humberto Maturana's biological autopoiesis. These three disciplines provide a diagnostic model for regional survival based on the rigid requirements of living systems. The central axis of this framework is what McMurtry calls the life ground test. The life ground consists of the physical materials required for survival: clean water, consistent food supplies, secure shelter, and medical continuity. The foundational axiom here is biological. Human beings cannot negotiate, forgive, or govern when these baseline conditions are being destroyed. Any political arrangement or security blockade that disables these physical needs for a given population is mathematically unstable. It ensures future rupture. Protecting civilian life support systems is the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite for political viability. To understand how the life ground is dismantled, we apply Johan Galtung's triad of VIAVAPs. The first segment is direct violence. This is the visible kinetic injury reported on the news: bombings, hostage-taking, and physical displacement. The second is structural violence. This is the avoidable institutional disablement of life, enforced through blockades, resource denial, and legal inequality. The third is cultural violence. These are the symbolic and narrative systems that normalize the other two forms, framing physical and structural harm as necessary or defensive. These three forces operate as a perpetual motion machine. Historical trauma feeds narrative. That narrative justifies structural control, and the resulting structural desperation breeds new physical violence. This explains why traditional ceasefires fail. They silence the guns, but leave the resource denial and the sacred erasure completely intact. Any system will inevitably regenerate the physical violence it refuses to structurally repair. To break this loop, we have to replace the geopolitical chessboard metaphor with Humberto Maturana's biological concept of structural coupling. Populations living closely in a shared environment are constantly co-determining each other's future outcomes through their recurrent daily interaction. Maturana introduces a concept called emotioning, the invisible affective field that dictates what a population is actually capable of perceiving. When a population operates within a pervasive emotional field of fear, humiliation, or rage, that field filters all incoming information. Under conditions of existential threat, rational diplomatic proposals can be systematically processed by the opposing group as biological attacks. Genuine coexistence cannot be forced upon a living system via external decree. The environment itself must be altered to allow new behaviors to emerge. The most dangerous engine of cultural violence driving this system is what Sahely calls wound sovereignty. This chart maps how wound sovereignty operates. It is the process by which a population converts severe historical trauma into an unquestionable entitlement to dominate another group. Note the strict boundary between a legitimate life need and its life-incoherent distortion. To fix the system, we have to separate a population's valid need for safety from the specific strategies that destroy others. Look at the row detailing Jewish historical trauma. The need for physical security and safe refuge is absolute. But when that trauma mutates into perpetual insecurity, it is used to justify open-ended occupation. Now look at the row for Palestinian dispossession. The need for freedom and self-determination is equally absolute. But when that dispossession is weaponized, it morphs into annihilationist politics and victim sovereignty. The Life-Coherent framework sets a strict mandate: no wound denied, no wound enthroned. Trauma is a historical reality, but it cannot be used as a moral license to destroy the life ground of another. The operational antidote to this cycle of violence is detailed in this diagram of Dr. Sahely's 7-movement spiral, revolving entirely around life ground protection. The protocol functions as a recursive loop, applying constant pressure to expand the margins of what is possible in the region. It relies on the geopolitical application of wu-wei, a concept of non-forcing action. In this context, wu-wei means applying the exact minimum sufficient intervention required to stop direct physical violence. You pair that immediate restraint with the maximum possible effort to restore viable civil options and safe relational spaces. When legitimate needs fatally collide, the valid arbitration test is whether an action preserves life capacity without sacrificing the vulnerable. This requires moving away from negative peace, the temporary silence of guns enforced by a border wall, and building positive peace. Positive peace manifests physically as the civil commons. This graphic details the structural layers of a civil commons peace infrastructure. The foundation layer secures the physical networks that underpin civil life: shared water grids, medical cooperation, and ecological restoration. Establishing these shared physical networks functionally rewrites the biological structural coupling of the region. In a structurally coupled region, the destruction of one population's viability eventually returns as a threat to the other. Protecting the shared life ground addresses the biological and material constraints that dictate whether any regional order remains stable.